Hello, everybody. So my name is Tatum Laird, and I'm going to be talking about the post-market surveillance of medical devices. So a little bit of today's agenda, we're going to go into a little bit of background on this paper, address the issue, go into the methods, results, and then talk about the discussion and conclusion. So for the background, medical devices, I'll refer to them as MDs in this presentation. They're the backbone of the healthcare system. And the pre-market, which we think of as phase 1, 2, and 3, it's highly regulated and it's harmonized globally. And so what we don't often think about is phase 4, which is post-market. And so each country actually has their own post-marketing regulations, as well as some harmonized international standards. Post-market surveillance, or PMS, is a collection of processes to monitor the performance of the medical device once it's on the market. And so a lot of these issues, they monitor our usage problems once they're out being used in healthcare institutions and how the device behaves once it's being used in practice. So the issue addressed in this paper is that there are no difference in medical devices that are used between the countries. However, they found that the incidence rate differs due to the differences in surveillance levels between countries. And this indicates that the current post-marketing surveillance process may have issues. If we're seeing that these devices are the same, they should be used the same throughout all these countries, but, why are certain countries seeing different amount of incidence rates? So to adjust this, the authors used preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, or PRISMA. And this diagram looks a little bit chaotic. It's nice, but it's a little bit chaotic, so let me walk you through it. So this is what they did for their research. They started with the initial search, which they used 3 different databases, EBCSO, Medline, and PubMed. They found, as you can see, 511 papers from EBCSO, 484 from Medline, and 1287 from PubMed. Then they removed the duplicates from these, and then they went through the screening process. And they had a lot of, they had 5 different inclusion criteria for their papers to be included in this meta-analysis review. And some of the inclusion criteria had the title contain post-market, medical device, FDA or EU, and the abstract contains medical device. And so after they applied this inclusion criteria, they saw 754 papers. The next inclusion criteria was the abstract containing medical device, and that brought it down to 201 papers. The next is full text available. That brought it down to 102. And last but not least, they wanted the study published in English, and they wanted the post-market surveillance of standalone devices, which means that these weren't medical devices that are implanted, but rather standalone devices. And that led them down to 24 articles. So this is quite a hefty process. The initial search yielded 2,282 articles, but after this whole screening process, they brought it down to 24 articles, and they were able to split these 24 articles into 3 different subsections that these papers were talking about. They found 3 articles that fell into the category of medical device registry, 3 articles that talked about adverse event reporting, and 18 articles talked about performance evaluation of medical devices. So let's talk about the results for the first 3 papers, the medical device registry. So they found that countries have implemented medical device registries through national authority. Most countries have this. But the research concluded that patient registries are preferred over medical device registries because it actually highlights the risk stratification. So it prioritizes and categorizes the risks that these medical devices pose. However, it's still important to have a medical device registry because it does streamline the process for post-market surveillance, and it can diminish the amount of and the risk of faulty devices. Registration of a medical device is a prerequisite for placement on the market. So it needs to be registered under a national authority. And some countries have a different PMS registry, different post-market surveillance registry. Some have a digital medical device registry for inspection and safety management. And this digital registry could actually open doors for the future for using AI and helping kind of sort through these results and organization of this medical device registry. Next, we're going to talk about the results for the adverse event reporting. Medical professionals are responsible and they're required to report adverse events and contribute to medical device registries. And the manufacturers or distributors, they are required to do a follow-up report. And so the manufacturer and user facility device experience, or MAUDE, MAUDE, database is regulated by the FDA, and it holds all the information regarding adverse events. And while this seems great, it seems like a streamlined process, these researchers found that 96.6% of adverse events in the US are reported by manufacturers. So where are these adverse events being reported by the medical professionals or physicians from these healthcare institutions that are actually using these in the field? They also found that patients are 5 times more likely to report than physicians, which also poses an issue considering that, usually it's the physicians that are using these medical devices and they should be reporting and they are required to report, but they're not. And unambiguous regulatory framework is needed for better reporting and post-market surveillance and harmonization between countries, because they did find that the United Kingdom actually had a better system than the US does in terms of reporting accuracy of adverse events. And last but not least, the performance evaluation of medical devices. So once again, we do have national legislation that requires performance evaluations, and it obliges manufacturers and distributors to conduct these performance evaluations to make sure that their medical devices are, performing and keeping up with as time goes by, or just as the devices are used in the field. However, they found that less than 50% of 47 manufacturers conducted medical device performance inspection. So I believe in this study, it was only about 22 manufacturers that conducted their, what they should be doing is a medical device performance inspection every so often, and only 22 out of 47 manufacturers that they were researching. So less than 50%, which is a little bit frightening. And 30% of the tested mechanical ventilators were not operating properly. These are just some statistics that they found. And 13.84% of tested anesthesia machines were not in compliance with the regulations that the anesthesia machine should have been compliant at. So again, a little bit frightening. It shows that there needs to be strict regulation for performance evaluation. And it's important to develop a harmonized evidence-based methodology for collection of medical device performance data on a regular basis. So overall results, the post-market surveillance gaps that they identified were limited function of the medical device registries. They were only acting really as an administrative role. They were only facilitating registration and imports of medical devices, but not much more. It was kind of just a database that's just having an administrative role. The second gap they found is that adverse event reporting differs globally, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing a difference in medical device discrepancies and incidence reports between countries. The third gap is that medical device performance evaluations, they reveal variation in performance. And last, the performance of medical device cannot be assessed with certainty due to differences in data collection across healthcare institutions. So again, there's not a harmonized set of rules or regulations that need to be followed. Their rules right now are kind of up to interpretation by healthcare professionals, healthcare institutions, and that's part of the reason that we're having these gaps in post-market surveillance for medical devices. Last but not least, a little bit of the discussion and conclusion. they gave a little story of why post-market surveillance is extremely important, and I thought I would do a little quick share. There was a case in which mechanical ventilators were placed on the market without clinical testing. They were amazing in pre-market. Of course, there's strict regulations in phase 1, 2, 3 of medical devices. They're placed on the market. And once they were actually being used in clinical settings, they proved to be faulty in countries with less regulated post-market surveillance. And this actually led to a lawsuit because this actually caused harm in the field. And then a little bit more of the discussion and conclusion. Comparison of post-market surveillance of medical devices worldwide revealed a fragmentation in the process. So it lacked harmonization, unlike the pre-market process where things are very streamlined nationally and globally. So there needs to be an evidence-based conformity assessment of medical devices during post-market surveillance to make sure that the rules are very clear. There's strict obligations on healthcare institutions, manufacturers, distributors. There needs to be a clear-cut, streamlined process of when you need to report, how the registry needs to look, who needs to report, who needs to follow up, what requires a report. And a little bit of my opinion was that, but I also believe that a more uniform process and stricter obligations on healthcare institutions and manufacturers will allow for more reliable medical devices. Of course, that's what we all want. That's what healthcare institutions and professionals should want. And we've seen it be done in the pre-market process. And in some countries, they're better at having a streamlined post-market surveillance process. So it is possible, but we need to have global harmonization of these processes, a little more strict, in order to have more reliable medical devices in the field. And that is it. I am open to questions.
Thank you.